Hi there, welcome to 2.6 Leasing. So we've looked at how we can buy a new car and how we can buy a used car. We do have a third option when we're looking for a vehicle, and that's leasing. When you lease a vehicle, you don't own it, so you don't actually have possession of it. Rather, you simply have the right to drive it for a return period of time. So the car dealership you are leasing from still owns that vehicle. However, they will allow you to drive it for 2, 3, or 4 years, depending on your agreement. So when you are leasing, the advantage, of course, is that you are getting a new or newer car every 3 or 4 years, and you're not responsible for the general maintenance. However, the downside, of course, is that you always have that payment. And because you always have that payment, you'll never get any equity in your vehicle. You'll always have that monthly payment for the rest of your life. You must pay a set amount each month, and at the end of the term, whether that be 2, 3, 4, and I've even seen some 5 or 6 year leases now, at the end of that term, you can give the vehicle back, walk away from it, or you have an option to actually buy it out, so you actually own it at the end of the term for something called our residual value. And we'll take a look at some of these terms coming up. So when we're leasing, there are a few terms that we need to be familiar with. The lease term, and this is the time period of the lease, and most of the time it's expressed in months. So I'm not saying I have a 3-year lease, rather I say I have a 36-month lease. We have a lease payment, and that's the amount of money we need to pay every single month. Now, the interesting thing about the lease payment is that we have the idea of taxes. So our taxes must be included. Residual value. Now, the residual value of my vehicle is the predicted value at the end of the lease. Well, I sign a lease, and I sign it for 3, 4, 5 years. And what I do at my lease signing is the company says, okay, at the end of the lease, which is say 5 years, we predict the value of this car to be $20,000. So because it's a prediction, they don't actually know the value. So sometimes it's going to be a good prediction, in which case the car is actually worth the exact amount that they predict, or sometimes it's a poor prediction. So sometimes the car is worth less than they say you can buy it for. That would be bad. You wouldn't want to be buying a car for less than it's worth. Now, in the odd cases, the car is actually worth more than what they predict, in which case you might want to try to buy it out if the residual value is less than what the car is worth. The residual value rate. Usually the value is predicted at, say, 85% or 75% of its current value. So this rate is what they use to get the residual value. Finally, they are going to ask you to make a security deposit. This is a refundable amount used to pay for minor repairs, scratches, or dents when you drive a vehicle. If you're driving a vehicle for, say, 4 or 5 years, odds are there are going to be some small scratches or maybe some small dents that happen over that lifetime of the car. So they want that car to be in brand new condition. So they're going to ask you to put down some money, say $500 as a security deposit. And what they'll do is they'll repair the car using that security deposit. If there's anything left, they'll give it back to you. So it's protection for the company to make sure they get the car back in mint condition. So let's look at an example here as what we might be asked to do in terms of leasing. Tara wants to lease an SUV worth $38,000 plus tax. Now, of course, it has to come from a car dealership. You cannot lease from a private citizen. So taxes here are both PST and GST. The lease payment is $370 plus taxes for 36 months. And of course we know 36 months is 3 years. For leasing, a down payment is required of $2,750. Most leases require a down payment of some sort. and she's got a refundable security deposit of $500. She's also going to have to pay the first month's payment when the lease is signed. So when she goes and signs that lease, there's a lot she has to pay. She'll have to pay her down payment, her security, and her first month. The residual value rate, so their predicted rate after 3 years, is 75%. So the car dealership thinks that after 3 years, it'll be worth 75% of what it is worth right now. So let's look at some typical questions. Find the total monthly lease payment, including taxes, for Tara. Well, the lease payment was up here at $370, so that's our starting point. $370, but we have to include taxes. Now taxes are GST and PST, so I'll do my quick way of getting taxes, times it by 1.13, my final answer, and of course that will be, with a calculator, $418.10. Now, of course, the other way would be taking 370 timesing by 0.13. That'll give you your tax amount, and then adding it back to 370 to end up with 418.10. Find the total lease payment. Well, total lease payment is after my 3 years, how much have I given the company? Well, every month I'm paying $418.10. And I'm going to multiply this by the number of payments. Well, I make one payment a month for 36 months. So I times by 36. And at the end of 3 years, I'll have paid them $15,051.60. So for 3 years, I'm making payments, 15 grand. Now realize at the end of my 3 years, I don't own the vehicle. So this 15 grand has gone directly to their pockets, and I'll have the option, do I want to walk away from this and pick up a new lease, or do I want to buy it out? But if I do buy it out, I still have to pay for the vehicle. Let's move on to question C. Find the amount which must be paid at the time the signing of the lease. Well, at the lease time, I have to pay a down payment. I have to pay my security deposit, which hopefully I get back, and I need my first month. So if I go to my question, my down payment was $2,750. My deposit, security deposit, was $500. And I just calculated my first payment, or all my payments with tax, to be $418.10. So I'm going to add these up. 2,750 plus 500 plus 418.10 gives me $3,668.10. So when I walk into the dealership, in order for me to leave with that vehicle, I'm going to have to bring along $3,668.10. Quite an initial amount to pay, but of course this is just when everything starts off. Once I make that first payment, I drive the car for a month, and then I only have payments of $418.10 for the next 3 years. Next is find the residual value of the SUV after 3 years. So we know the residual value rate was 75%. Now we think that the car will be worth 75% of its original value. So right now it's valued at $38,000. So in 3 years it's going to be worth 75% of that. So I multiply it by 0.75. So after 3 years it's worth $28,500 is their prediction. And of course they're usually pretty right, but every now and then they do get it wrong. Now that's the value of the vehicle. We still have to talk about taxes. So I'm going to take my $28,500 and I'd have to pay that to the car dealership, but then of course the government wants their share. So I'm going to multiply that by 1.13. So my bill with vehicle and taxes would be $32,205. So at the end of the lease, I have to ask myself, I have to do a little shopping, comparative shopping. Is my vehicle worth $32,000? If, for example, I find that it's only worth $30,000, I probably would not be paying it out. If I could sell my car for say 35 or 36, if I wanted to, I'd probably be buying it out because that'd be a good deal for me. So the residual value will have to include taxes as well. So now is the most interesting question we have. Find the total value if you would pay the purchase price of the vehicle after the 3-year lease. So once my 3 years is up, I actually want to buy this vehicle. The question now is, what has it actually cost me? I've been paying money for 3 years, I've put some deposits down. What is my final cost? So at the end of my 3 years, if I buy it out, I've paid a whole bunch of total lease payments, 3 years worth. I paid, sorry about that, little glitch in the system. So again, we're talking about the amount we need to pay for the entire car if we buy it out. I've made 3 years of total lease payments. I had a down payment that I have to consider. And of course, I have this residual value that I buy it out at. So what were my total payments? Well, I figured that out in Part B. In Part B, I realized that I've made $15,051.60 in lease payments. I made a down payment of $500. And I have to pay my residual value plus taxes of $32,205. So if I take these three numbers and add them up, if I was to buy out this car at the end of my 3 years, I would have actually paid $50,006.60 for this vehicle. That's a lot of money considering that at the original price it would have only been worth $38,000. So in this case, my argument is that leasing would not be a good idea. However, if you can negotiate a better lease payment, if you can negotiate a better residual value, perhaps leasing might be your option. So now you can turn to your book and work on some questions.